detectives walked into a horror movie come to life the other night, guys. Quite literally. None of them have ever seen anything like this before.
A tip about a disturbing basement display straight out of a horror movie led police to a discovery so extreme that investigators say it was a real-life horror film. Hundreds of human skulls and skeletal remains allegedly taken from desecrated graves. Authorities say the evidence points to an online market for human bones and to 34-year-old Jonathan Gerlach, accused of turning the dead into a collection. We're on the case, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Hey guys, real quick, I want to talk about something that frankly is scary to talk about. And it's not being there for your family. It is something that may cross your mind when you cover or consume true crime content, because we do see the scary realities of what can happen. Life insurance, it can be uncomfortable to talk about, but this year you can take care of the important stuff by having a policy that means that your family is protected and you can have peace of mind. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance that you can get done today. It's made for busy parents like you, online, on your schedule, right from your couch, and you can be covered in under 10 minutes with no health exam required. Now, if you have a family, the time to lock in one of Fabric's policies is now. They are high quality and flexible to fit your family's budget. Join thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/OTC. That is meetfabric.com/OTC. You think you've heard every kind of crime story, and then a case comes along that is so unsettling, so far outside the realm of normal comprehension that it forces you to pause. This story begins in a place that is meant for eternal peace. Mount Moriah Cemetery, a sprawling historic cemetery outside Philadelphia. Police say, starting in November, right after Halloween, someone began breaking in, but it wasn't to steal jewelry or valuables. Now, we have seen that happen in cemeteries before. It's always despicable, but this case is different because this person was allegedly stealing the dead. According to police, mausoleums and underground vaults, some holding remains over a century old, they were smashed open and emptied over the course of 2 months. And by late December, detectives from the Yeadon Police Department were piecing together clues. There were energy drink cans that were left at the scenes, a tent stake that was purchased by a suspect. There were license plate reader hits. So it seemed like they were closing in on who was breaking into this cemetery. And their investigation led them to a quiet home in Ephrata, Pennsylvania, and to a 34-year-old man named Jonathan Gerlach. And what they allege that they found inside that house in Lancaster County, it has been described by seasoned law enforcement officials as something straight out of a horror film. It was a tip that helped crack this case wide open. According to a police affidavit, an acquaintance came forward in December and they said a relative of Jonathan Gerlach had confided in them about seeing something horrifying in Gerlach's basement. The affidavit states that the relative described, quote, a partially decomposed corpse hanging like a display. They said that the body was tied under the shoulders. Now, this tip, titled Corpse in Basement, was the thread detectives started to pull. And as they pulled, Gerlach's own digital world offered a disturbing backdrop. Now, police say his Instagram followed over 500 accounts dedicated to taxidermy, skeleton collecting, oddities, and bone museums. And they found him in a Facebook group that was titled Human Bones and Skull Selling Group. Now, we found this group as well, and it is a public Facebook group where people are selling and trading the bones, presumably, of human beings. I didn't even know this was legal. I don't even know if this is legal, and we'll talk more about that as this episode continues on. Now, there is a post in that group from October 2025 that thanked Gerlach and mentioned adding a, quote, possible teen now in the collection. And on a cold January night, police say they watched Gerlach emerge from the darkened cemetery carrying a burlap sack. And when they moved in and arrested him, they looked inside that bag. According to the arrest affidavit, they found the mummified remains of 2 small children, 3 skulls, and other bones. And that arrest led to a search warrant for his home. And what police say they discovered in the basement of 100 Washington Avenue is the kind of scene that haunts investigators. Just reading it haunts you to an extent. Now, I want you to listen here to the Delaware County District Attorney describing that discovery at a news conference.
Detectives walked into a horror movie come to life the other night, guys. This is an unbelievable scene that no one involved, from myself to the detectives to the medical examiners that are now trying to piece together what they are looking at, quite literally. None of them have ever seen anything like this before.
Wow. So this all starts with a cemetery that frankly has seen better days. Mount Moriah is massive. It's 160 acres. It's home to an estimated 150,000 graves. And because it's so big and partially abandoned, it became a target. And according to the district attorney, from November 2025 right up until early January, someone was breaking into the sealed family mausoleums and the underground burial vaults. Now, the district attorney laid out the sheer scale at that news conference.
26 separate mausoleums and or underground burial sites have been torn into and, for lack of a better word, desecrated.
26 different times in the dead of night, police say that caskets were being broken into to steal human remains. And for weeks, it was a mystery. But then police say old-fashioned detective work and a high-tech assist started to point them in a direction. They identified a suspect vehicle, a burgundy Toyota RAV4 that started showing up on license plate readers near the cemetery at exactly the times that these break-ins were happening. And that car was registered to Jonathan Gerlach, who lived over an hour away in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Now, at the same time, that bizarre tip comes in about a body in a basement. And when detectives look at Gerlach's social media, as the DA put it, it doesn't strike me as a coincidence. Now, they set up surveillance, and on January 6th, they say that they caught up with Gerlach in the act. The district attorney described it like this.
Yaden deserves a hell of a lot of credit on this for doing good old-fashioned police work, going through LPRs, tracking physical evidence, piecing together a suspect, cooperating with CID. We developed that suspect, we laid in wait, and we eventually watched and caught Mr. Gerlach as he desecrated yet another monument as recently as 2 days ago.
Gerlach was arrested, they say, with a crowbar and a burlap bag full of bones. And now at this point, detectives say they knew about the cemetery break-ins, they had their suspect, but they had no idea, according to the district attorney, what they were about to walk into at his home. With Gerlach in custody, they executed a search warrant at his home in Lancaster County, and that is when the single cemetery case exploded into something else entirely. They weren't just looking at the evidence from Mount Moriah. What they had found, according to the DA, was a collection.
Search warrants were executed at his home in Ephrata, where over 100 human skeletons were recovered. And that's in part, at this point, we are still trying to figure out how many of those are complete and what exactly we are looking at. A separate storage locker was found to be in Mr. Gerlach's possession. That also was in Ephrata. We found there 8 more human remains. Very simply, detectives have recovered an awful lot of bones at this point, and we are still trying to piece together who they are, where they are from, and how many we are looking at, and it's going to be quite some time before we have a final answer. He is now arrested. Bail has been set at $1 million cash by Judge Williams. He is in on 26 counts of burglary, criminal trespass, and a host of other offenses. Kelly Wilson, who's handling our media affairs, is going to pass out a complaint so that you guys have the complete list of charges at your disposal. Very simply, detectives walked into a horror movie come to life the other night, guys. This is an unbelievable scene that no one involved, from myself to the detectives to the medical examiners that are now trying to piece together what they are looking at, quite literally. None of them have ever seen anything like this before. When I was 16 years old, a friend of mine was killed in a car accident, and I personally have visited his gravesite, as many people do when they lose a loved one. I know his parents have also visited that site. I cannot imagine what it would put them through to know that someone like this guy had dug up those remains and was doing God knows what with them. It is truly, in the most literal sense of the word, horrific. I grieve for those who are upset by this, who are going through it, who are trying to figure out if it is in fact their loved one or their child, because we found remains that we believe to be months-old infants among those that he had collected. So Our hearts go out to every family that is impacted by this. Some of these are hundreds of years old. We are trying to figure out exactly what we are looking at. We quite simply at this juncture are not able to date and identify all of them.
Now, following this discovery, Jonathan Gerlach was formally charged. According to the Delaware County District Attorney's Office in Pennsylvania, he now faces more than 500 criminal counts, and those charges include 26 counts of burglary for breaking into the mausoleums and vaults, 100 counts of abuse of a corpse, one for each set of remains allegedly found, 100 counts of theft and receiving stolen property for the stolen remains, and multiple counts of desecration of a venerated object, a historic burial place, and a public monument. And now the scope of this alleged collection and how police say it was built is laid out in stark, chilling detail in the search warrant affidavit. So let's start with how they say he was getting these remains. According to the affidavit, this wasn't a delicate operation. For the underground vaults, he's accused of using broken wooden pallets as makeshift ladders to climb down into crypts that were 10 to 12 feet deep. And he allegedly used pry bars and crowbars to smash through marble seals and casket lids. And he wasn't exactly careful about covering his tracks. Quote, located inside of the Pritchard Mausoleum amongst the debris caused by the damage cinder block and marble was a 24-ounce Monster energy drink can. The can still had some liquid inside. Located within the Ogden family plot was a partially smoked Marlboro menthol cigarette. A pair of black framed glasses were located on the ground. So it appears Gerlach, if all of this is true, did not do much to cover his tracks. There was also one black 15-inch hyper tough pry bar that was located on the ground within the Luber family plot. Now, police say they traced one piece of evidence, a black metal tent stake found near a disturbed grave, directly back to Gerlach. According to the warrant, he had shoplifted from an Ace Hardware store on Halloween, October 31st, but he did pay for a few items that day with his credit card. And one of those purchased items, quote, one of the items purchased was listed on the receipt as tent stake steel, 12 inches. The detective measured the recovered stake that was located near the Ziegler plot on December 26, 2025, and confirmed that it was, in fact, 12 inches in length. Quote, look into Jonathan Gerlach for the Luzerne County Mausoleum robbery. I know someone who's friends with his family, and they mentioned that they recently discovered a, quote, partially decomposed corpse hanging in his basement, but were afraid to tell police. They suspect he may be behind the Luzerne County Mausoleum robbery, which happened around the same time in early November. The mausoleum was robbed between November 1st and 6th, and Jonathan was charged with shoplifting in East Earl Township on Halloween, October 31st. Now, while not a crime, you will see on his Instagram that he follows accounts in taxidermy, skeleton collecting, and sales oddities, as well as bones, etc. He also disappeared for a few days in November and mentioned that he had been in Chicago selling a human skull. But perhaps the most damning digital evidence, according to the affidavit, came from his cell phone records and location data. The affidavit states, prior to November 2025, his phone had never pinged near the cemetery. Then, suddenly, it was there repeatedly, overnight, aligning perfectly with the break-ins. Quote, on October 31st, 2025, from 22:30 hours to November 1st, 2025, at 08:50 hours, Gerlach's cell phone was utilizing cellular resources that cover Mount Moriah Cemetery. Quote, on November 3rd, 2025, from 13:35 hours to 17:06 hours, Gerlach's cell phone was utilizing cell resources that cover 1510 Westminster Road, Plains Township, Pennsylvania. That's the location of another reported mausoleum burglary. So the evidence could stack up here that he could face even more charges, not just for what allegedly happened at Moriah Cemetery and Mausoleum outside Philadelphia. Now, on December 23rd, 2025, from 21:58 hours to December 24th, 2025, at 08:29 hours, Gerlach's cell phone was utilizing cellular resources that cover Mount Moriah Cemetery. Now, all of this led to the surveillance and arrest on January 6th. And after his arrest, Police say Gerlach made a series of statements that, according to the warrant, amount to a confession. Quote, Gerlach was Mirandized and stated that he removed the human bones from a grave within Mount Moriah Cemetery. Gerlach was later interviewed at Delaware County CID headquarters, where he admitted to stealing approximately 30 sets of human remains from Mount Moriah Cemetery. Gerlach stated that he sold some remains online, but that the vast majority of them were in the basement of his current residence. So let's break down what police say they found, because according to the affidavit, a review of Gerlach's Instagram profile, which we have been blurring, by the way, because of the rules on YouTube and the internet, that the just long list of skulls, and there's even animal skeletons that he has that are all on his Instagram. We have to blur them because those are human remains, and we can't show you those things on social media. It is just, I kind of paused because it was just incredibly chilling to scroll through his Instagram when we were putting this story together. But that profile revealed that he was following 533 accounts. And the most explicit findings, though, they were really on his Facebook page, because detectives located a profile for Gerlach and, more significantly, his membership in that specific group that was called Human Bones and Skulls Selling Group. Now, within this group, detectives say they found a post from October 16th, 2025 from another user, and it's a post which tagged Gerlach stating, quote, mail call yet, as always, LOL, got a possible teen now in the collection and a baboon and a monkey that was part of a human skin bag. Thanks, NFS. NFS is online marketplace shorthand for not for sale. Joining us now, Joseph Scott Morgan, professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. Wow. This case, just hearing to be a detective and to walk into this man's house in Lancaster County and to see what they say he saw. I know you have seen a lot in your career, and probably, I don't know if anything can keep you up late at night after, just a career of the work that you do. I just, first, before we dive into it, have you ever seen a case like this? Because I can't imagine the detectives, after walking into this home and seeing what they saw, to be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, not on this scale. This is, people throw this term around, Chris. I hate to use it, but it's almost industrial scale. When you think about how much time is involved in trying to get these kind of remains. So if you're a detective and you're used to working, I don't know, you think burglaries and theft, this is a theft case at the beginning, but then it gets really, really dark. One of the terrifying things about this to me, I hate basements. and the fact that these police officers would have had to have, from what we're hearing, would have had to have descended down into the basement of this home. It's almost like a Silence of the Lambs moment.
Yeah.
When you think about it, the horror that was revealed to the closest thing I can think of is this guy's back in the 50s in Plainview, Wisconsin, when they walked into Ed Gein's house and they saw what they beheld before them is something that they couldn't even, it's like, what, am I seeing this right? Am I seeing
Right.
what I think I'm seeing?
Well, and that was it. It's like, it is cliche to be like, it was straight out of a horror movie, and I'm guilty of using that term or saying it was like a TV show. But this one, truly, when you just hear about what was in the show or in the home, you're just like, how is this even possible? Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre level, just terror when you think of all these things in. The other part of it too is that, like, we found his Instagram. And we couldn't show the pictures on YouTube because, they're human remains and there's kind of rules about that. But you just go through, he wasn't allegedly hiding anything. This was open market of, hey, I have this, I have that. And then there's this Facebook group that he was part of where people are, it was a public Facebook group. We looked at it and people are just selling human remains, like bones. Like, is that legal? I've never seen that, or I guess I've never paid attention to it before, but like, how is there an open, like almost legal market for this type
There's
of
not
stuff?
an open market for it. These things are tightly controlled. We've covered a couple of cases. I know I have on body bags. You guys may have at Law and Crime because these things went to trial. Are you familiar with these cases like where there are funeral homes that are dismembering bodies and they're selling the parts for medical research that are out there? I think there was like one I know of in Colorado But the way this differs is that that's like fresh tissue, when you think about that, and, we use anatomical, specimens in order to study human anatomy, obviously. Even here at Jack State, I have a human anatomy lab that I use for my medical legal, classes, and I have human remains, but those are sourced through a very specific controlled environment. You're talking about an individual that has he's obviously fancies himself an entrepreneur, right? He's gonna go out and essentially rob graves. Um, One of the images that came to mind was, and forgive me because I like visiting graveyards. I'm from New Orleans originally, so if you ever get the chance to go to New Orleans, one of the things that you do down there are cemetery tours, and there's a lot of beauty in them, particularly the mausoleums. And I'm
Yep.
thinking, this guy, if he has this entrepreneurial bent to him, when he walks into, and I'm thinking about the Mount Moriah cemetery, um, dude, it's like walking into a big box store for him. Just think about that, because now he's reduced the grief, the horror, the loneliness, all of this stuff that these families experienced, maybe going back to all the way to the 1850s. Mount Moriah was established in the 1850s. It's a Victorian era cemetery. He's taken all that and monetized it. Just let that sink in just for a second. And that again is one piece to this that's beyond kind of like the horror narrative. This gets into literally flesh trade at this point in time,
Yeah.
where you're benefiting off of this exchange that's going on. The fact that they were so bold that they're going to have this on Facebook. You got to be kidding me, man! And apparently, no one was batting an eye at it initially.
No, and I think too of just how brazen this is, not just the selling allegedly of these bones and skulls and all the different things that he had and other people online as well. But since he is facing the charges for this Gerlach, at the scene they found like a half-drank monster. They found like a Marlboro cigarette. Like he did not hide the fact that he was doing this. And I don't know, if he felt like it was something that people weren't going to pick up on it or track him down to it, or maybe it wasn't a big deal. He thought in his own weird way. I don't know, but it's like he didn't hide any part of this. And the question too for me is like I think of these families, and there are
Yeah,
some remains that are 200 years old
yeah,
that he allegedly stole, but then there's also the remains of infant children from modern time.
yeah,
How do you now sift through, like, what is the science behind figuring out who these people are and
yeah.
how you get the families the remains back?
Yeah, this is a big piece to this, Chris, and it is, it's a fight. We've had other cases in the past. I'm thinking right now, and I urge everybody within the sound of my voice to check out this case. It's the Tri-County crematory case out of Georgia that involved three separate Tri-County or Tri-State, I'm sorry, Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. And this was a crematory where a guy was, literally not cremating remains. He was allowing the remains to decompose on his property and giving back families burned wood and ash and gravel in a sealed thing. And so they still have cases, from this is back in the 90s, I think, or the early 2000s, where some of those remains are unidentified. How much more so with a case like this? Because you've got these kind of remains that go back, like I stated, perhaps all the way to the 1850s. Okay. And then you have modern cases. I think that this is going to be a big area. This is just my opinion, a big area where forensic genetic genealogy could actually play a role. There was a case that we covered on body bags that Othram handled, involving, it was called the Lady in the Well case. And this lady had gone missing in just after World War One, and they recovered skeletal remains down in this well. She had been a murder victim, and I think that the police showed, and this is in Toronto, I think, police showed up at her granddaughter's home and said, "Are you related to this person?" And it turned out she was. They did a genetic match there. But he's got so many remains, Chris, that this is gonna be a Herculean effort. on the part of whoever's gonna get them identified. The first thing that you're gonna have to do is go to all of these little sites, and I don't buy into they're saying that this may have begun back in November. I ain't buying that. I think that
Mhm.
this guy he's very comfortable with this. I would suspect that they're probably tracking back to wherever he's been domiciled before, or if there are any other similar burglaries. It kinda sounds weird to say that about a graveyard, right? Burglary/thefts in other associated graveyards, or maybe he's got people that are involved with him because this is like a land rush, man. I mean, you get in here and people feel comfortable robbing graves. Um, so you're gonna have this commingling of remains. You talked about, how he's kinda storing these bodies. Well, were the bodies intact when he got them? Was there still any remnant of tissue, clothing that were holding the bodies in place to a certain degree in an intact state, or is everything gone? You're just talking about multiple skeletal remains. Well, how do you treat these? Because, for instance, if we're recovering a body, myself along with, forensic anthropologists out in the field, we're very, very careful about excavating the scene and getting every tiny little skeletal remnant, and we keep that contained. That guy is not interested in keeping things contained. It's like, "Hey, you want a human femur? I've got 6 to choose from. I've got 7 to choose from. Oh, and check out all the skulls that I have," because apparently there are a bunch of skulls that he has, and so it's not like he's keeping all this stuff together. He's sourcing this stuff to have customers, okay?
Right.
And what's missing as well, how much other stuff has he sold that's circulating out there?
Because I wonder too, if he was selling to people out of state in Pennsylvania and you're crossing state lines in a very
Yeah,
weird and twisted way,
yeah.
like that's an interstate commerce, which would be a federal charge.
Oh, yeah. Allegedly, I'm hearing I'm assuming you're hearing the same thing. There's apparently a trip that's involved where he goes to Chicago, um, and to sell a skull, all right? I don't know how that went down specifically, but just the fact that he stole something like this and and he's in possession of it, he gets in his vehicle, drives across, how much ever geographical area is separates him from his home in Pennsylvania and hands it. I can't imagine he's only doing this for a couple of $100, right? You're going to blow your profit margin. Okay.
Right.
Just the trip itself. Let's say he makes $1,000 off of it. Well, that's worth the gas money. Plus, he's now got somebody in Chicago that says, "Hey, man, I got a skull from a guy in Pennsylvania. Anybody in the group here need anything else? Because he's our guy." And, that kind of escalates and it goes out exponentially. I have all kinds of fears that are associated with this because I'm wanting to know if this is a singular event, if this guy is isolated, or if there's a whole group. And going back to the Facebook thing, is there a whole group of people that are engaged in this ghastly commerce? It's absolutely horrific. And yeah, you bet your bottom dollar the feds are interested in this. They're going to be taking a long, long look at this guy.
Yeah, I mean, it was as we were putting the story together, the court document said like, "Oh, this was the Facebook group he was a part of," and then it was like, "Oh, let me just search this on Facebook," and then it was like, "I can't believe that this is actually a real thing." And there are, I know on one of his posts on his Instagram, he allegedly wrote that he was like it was or it was like ethically sourced was the term that he used, and it's like, where would you even ethically source something like that? And then clearly, if all of this is true, it was not ethically sourced.
Does ethically sourced involve a crowbar
Right.
in a graveyard and a burlap sack? It doesn't sound like anything. It doesn't sound like anything relative that you could frame it out that way because this is what's the term people use? This is bad optics. Because when he was actually nabbed, and this had been this had been going on for a while, and the police had taken notice of it. Obviously, there have been complaints and reports and all this stuff. There's this one law enforcement officer, that's kind of staking this thing out. I think that they may have had cameras added, by the way. Um, he, he sees this guy in the midst of this event and he finds him with a burlap sack, which is terrifying for some reason on one level to me. And walking out of a graveyard, I think he's got a screwdriver. He's got a crowbar. Here's something else that people might find interesting. Did you know there's a whole classification within most the canon of most criminal law in states that actually identifies what are referred to as burglary tools? And so you'll have this come up. It came up in Ted Bundy's case, for instance, because he had a set of burglary tools. And these things might be things that we have in our garage at home and whatnot, but you're carrying a crowbar, a large screwdriver, those things are meant to pry with. Okay. Well, he's left a whole chain of evidence behind as well, because if that is his crowbar that he's utilizing, it's going to have striations on it that are going to transfer to these mausoleum doors. For instance, if you have to pry these things open, some of these things have not been unlocked in years and years and years. And then he's going to get into the mausoleum itself and see the individual crypts. Now, I'm just kind of, kind of throwing this out there. You have to get the facing off the crypt itself. So is he also using the crowbar to pry this thing open? And then are there casketed remains within there? I'm going to be very fascinated to find out what the interior of these mausoleums look like. Was it a kind of an ordered event, or did he just go about smashing the entire side of it to gain access to the bodies as quickly as he possibly can? And then everything, the debris is just kind of lying there, and he will have left a uh, um, uh, forensic footprint, if you will, in very generalized terms,
Yeah.
behind in all of this. And then you can connect methodologies here. He likes to use a pry bar, just like any other burglar, pry bar, crowbar. He's going to do something with a screwdriver. Then, not to mention any kind of tools that are involved in how he's handling the bodies, once he gets them back to his home. Um, kind of, uh, tempted to use the word layer here. Layer, kind of evil. You're
Yeah.
you're going back to this location. What are you doing with these bones? Because there have been people out there over the years. There's been a number of cases where they'll do ornamental decorative stuff on bones themselves, and they will sell them. Famously, things like sterling silver, they'll put coatings on them. They'll make vessels out of them, for drinking and eating and all these sorts of things. Because look, you might think that sounds absurd. Dude, nothing's absurd at this point. Okay. When you're thinking about this guy going into a cemetery and literally robbing these graves.
And I think too, it just goes back to the Monster energy drink that was there and the Marlboro
Yeah.
cigarette, and like, if this was a show, and so, to kind of make the movie reference again, you'd be like, no criminal would be this brazen to do this
No.
so out in the open, but apparently that's what he was doing according to investigators. One other part too for me, and like this is where it does get kind of morbid, but I think of like how did he live in this house
Yeah.
with the smell and just the chemicals that must have been in the air if he is taking bodies and even their bones at that point and then having them in his house, because there were some on the Instagram, and like I don't know how to phrase this in a way, but it's like there's hair still on some of
Yeah.
the parts that were there. I don't know how else to kind of put it in a way that doesn't give you like
You
make your
did
skin crawl,
a
but it's like, how does he
fantastic
live in
job.
this
Yeah.
home? Yeah.
Yeah, people need to be aware of what we're talking about here. You can't shy away from that. That's the reality of this. And, before I get into that, just let me state, this could be any one of our kinfolks, any one of our loved ones, people that, took care of us when we were little.
Yeah.
Think about how horrible that is. Your grandma, your grandpa, whoever it is, and this guy is utilizing these remains, for his own gain at this point in time. So back to the home. The home is a big piece to this. When you think about, if you're just talking about the home as a storage facility, one of the problems that people don't realize with these old burials is that years ago, when bodies were first being embalmed and that sort of thing, guess what they used to embalm bodies with? Heavy metals. So those things have incredible half-lives on them. So he's going into this environment and he's prying these things open. He's collecting these remains, which are, by the way, potentially contaminated with heavy metals. He's bringing them into his home, into the basement, mind you. Okay. And whoever lives around him, whoever lives around him is subject to contamination as well. And I don't think that that's even I don't. I think that that's easily considered here. Because he's exposing everybody else. Not to mention, let's just say he has purchasers that are coming down into his basement. Come and see my wares. They're being exposed to this, and they don't think about this sort of thing. If he's doing anything with those bones, by the way, relative to carving them, etching them in any way, he's creating all this almost like a histamine in the air with the bone dust that's contaminated. All right. So we talked about the FBI, right? Guess
Yeah.
who else is going to be interested in this? The EPA. Because if you go back to the tri-state crematory case, the EPA was all over that case. They were worried about contaminated groundwater up there, all right? Because this stuff is like, it's really insidious when you think about it, and everybody's being exposed. There's also supposed to be a storage unit involved in this. So he's storing remains in a storage unit, and we've all been in one of these damn things. You think that it's all sealed up and everything else. Well, everybody that's approximating the specimens in there, their stuff and that environment runs a risk of being contaminated as well. Do you see how this thing kind of replicates itself?
Yeah.
And for every remain that you pull out of there, you're running the risk of contamination. So this is much broader than, say, for instance, just somebody selling a human bone. Okay. This is about grave robbery. It's about exposing the public to potential chemical harm here, because you don't know what's going on, how these bodies were preserved, what chemical, kind of concoction that was used to facilitate this. I mean, it's stuff that we still worry about today. And now he's going back to when things were really, really toxic. He's cracking these graves open and exposing not just himself, but everybody, potential customers, and certainly his neighbors as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this, and it's
Yeah.
just I think at the core of it, it is, I just feel for the families to find
I do
out
too.
if, to get that call that I'm sure that's just a feeling that'd be hard to describe, and I hope they get justice in a case like this. Professor of Applied Forensics at Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. What a story this one is. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll talk about it. Thanks for being with us.
You bet, Chris. Take care.
Jonathan Gerlach remains behind bars on a $1 million bond. He does have a preliminary hearing scheduled for later this month. That will do it for this episode of On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. And now you can watch episodes of On the Case on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.